Welcome, everyone. We are just letting folks enter the room and looking forward to starting in just a minute or so. Hi, Stephanie. Welcome.
Hi.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. I am Dr. Julie Searcy. I'm a medical anthropologist at Butler University, and I'm part of the task force for Indigenous inclusion on campus. My own work is not with Indigenous communities, but I am grateful to be a part of the task force and increasing my own knowledge. And I'm really excited to welcome you all to the first night of the Indigenous Activism Night School. It's a true honor to welcome you to our panel featuring Indigenous activists who are leading movements for justice, sovereignty, cultural preservation, and environmental stewardship. This gathering is not just an opportunity to listen, but it's an invitation to engage with and learn from those who are here speaking with us and are on the front lines of this work. I want to thank the Race, Gender, and Sexuality Studies program and the Hub for Black Affairs and Community Engagement, as well as the Center for Global Education, who are sponsoring this talk tonight. We are so fortunate to have three panelists with us, Stephanie Snow, Dr. Ku Kahakalau, and Marina Anderson, who I will introduce further in just a minute. But first, I want to, let me share my slides here. I want to do a land acknowledgement, and more than just a land acknowledgement, but we gather here at Butler University on the traditional homelands of Indigenous peoples who were forcibly removed from this place. These peoples include the Miami-Yaqui, Lenape, Potawatomi, Sawanwa, Kikapoi, and the Peora peoples. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the Indigenous people, past and present, who have stewarded it through the generations. This acknowledgement calls us to commit to hearing and engaging Indigenous voices and perspectives and to being better stewards of the land we inhabit. But more than that, it should call us to action. And in light of that call to action, I'll pause on this slide for just a minute to let folks open up some of the resources that we have gathered here. And just a note that following this first panel, we will also be sending out more resources, including some of the panelist information if you want to reach out to them as well. This is the first of two nights. The next one is on Wednesday and will feature regional Indigenous activists. And I also want to just thank Tom Mold and Cameron and Alina, who've been real forces behind making this happen in addition to the other members of the task force. Okay, so here's a brief plan for our evening together. I'm going to offer just a few framing remarks for our time together tonight, and then introduce the panelists, and we'll give the bulk of the time to the panelists to hear about their work on Indigenous activism and advocacy. And then there will be 20 or so minutes at the end where the audience can submit questions via the chat function. You can go ahead and submit those anytime as you're listening, but we'll have time at the end for the panelists to address those questions. And then we'll conclude with another chance to look at those resources that I just showed. And also, if you're here as a student and you're hoping to get the Butler Community Requirement credit, you will have a chance to get that at the end as well. So tonight we are going to be thinking about Indigenous activism from a broader lens. Just, a little grounding here. There are over 476 million Indigenous people living in 90 countries, accounting for about 6.2% of the global population, with more than 5,000 distinct groups among those folks. And they carry much of the burden of preserving the environment, as they protect and care for 22% of the Earth's land surface. We recognize that Indigenous communities worldwide have long resisted colonial violence and systemic oppression while offering visions for a more just and sustainable future. Today, we're privileged to hear directly from those working to protect their lands, cultures, and communities. The term Indigenous often refers to the original inhabitants of a region, but the concept of Indigenous shifts across geography and legal and cultural context. Globally, Indigenous identity is shaped by ongoing struggles for self-determination, the histories of colonial dispossession, and the preservation of distinct cultural practices and knowledge systems. However, we must also recognize that indigeneity may hold different political and social relevance depending on the specific histories and power dynamics of any given place. For example, in Australia, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples continue to fight for land restitution under the Native Title Act while challenging government policies that undermine their cultural and political autonomy. In the Americas, Indigenous nations like the Standing Rock Sioux have led international movements against resource extraction, as seen in their resistance to the Dakota Access Pipeline. Over in the Philippines, the Lumad people confront state violence and militarization while defending their ancestral domains. And across the Arctic, Native communities navigate dual threats of climate change and state encroachment, advocating for both environmental justice and the protection of subsistence rights. These examples illustrate how indigeneity is both rooted in place-specific struggles and linked by shared experiences of colonialism and resistance. Understanding processes of colonization clarifies why indigeneity may be more or less relevant in certain spaces. Colonialism is not just a historical event, but an ongoing structure that continues to shape land governance, cultural autonomy, and socio-political rights. This panel today invites us to consider how the experiences of Indigenous communities align with and diverge from those of other racially and ethnic groups. There are profound connections between Indigenous activism and Black liberation movements. Both are rooted in resisting settler, colonial, and racial capitalist systems that dispossess communities of land, culture, and autonomy. For instance, the movement for Black Lives has explicitly called for Indigenous sovereignty and an end to settler colonial violence, while Indigenous activists have joined Black-led struggles against state violence and mass incarceration. The shared experience of forced removal, structural violence, and cultural erasure creates natural points of solidarity. Additionally, we have a rich history of these collaborations and connections. Civil rights activists such as the late Clyde Bellecourt of the American Indian movement collaborated with Black Panther leaders on access to legal representation for political prisoners and on their mutual call for community self-determination. These intersections underscore how liberation for one group cannot be separated from the freedom of others, pushing us to imagine and work towards collective liberation. We recognize that while these groups share experience of systemic oppression and erasure, Indigenous peoples also face unique challenges related to territorial sovereignty, cultural survival, and nation-to-nation relationships. At the same time, the insights from Indigenous movements offer broader lessons for resisting dispossession and envisioning liberatory futures for us all. Each of our panelists brings a unique perspective shaped by their lived experience in organizing work. Their voices remind us that these struggles are not confined to any one region, but are interconnected across borders. As you listen today, I hope you will all have a chance to reflect on how these global issues resonate within our own local communities and what it means to be in solidarity with Indigenous movements. And with that context, I'm so pleased to introduce our panelists for tonight. Stephanie Snow. Miss Stephanie Bad Soldier Snow was raised on the Meskwaki settlement with traditional Meskwaki beliefs and language and is a member of the Swan Clan. She's also an enrolled member of the Ho-Chunk Nation of Wisconsin. Stephanie is a performer with a local Native American troupe that features song, storytelling, and dance. She's currently the education coordinator for the Meskwaki Nation. And she's worked as an assistant director of intercultural affairs at Grinnell College and also as an assistant director of the Meskwaki Historical Preservation and Museum. In 2012, she was a core founder of the Meskwaki Food Sovereignty Initiative. We also have with us tonight Marina Anderson. Marina is a Haida and Tlingit speaker, consultant, educator, and solutions-based strategist. Marina works at the intersections between culture, social, economic, and environmental justice. Marina's focus is to understand community needs in order to address them with sustainable solutions that are based on traditional ecological and social knowledge. Raised on her people's original homelands and waters, Marina centers traditional harvesting and food preservation, carving, weaving, beading, fur and skin sewing, and storytelling in her life to strengthen the health of the current and next generations. Marina has served on many community and tribal boards, including the Native Peoples Action Steering Committee. And we also have with us here tonight Dr. Ku Kahakalau, who is an award-winning Native Hawaiian educator, researcher, cultural practitioner, and expert in Hawaiian language and culture. She is the first person in the world with a PhD in Indigenous education and has created multiple successful cultural-based educational programs in Hawaii, including a culture-based teacher licensing program and a nonprofit EA Ecoversity, which is a culture-based higher education and career training program for young Hawaiians. EA stands for Education with Aloha, since her research confirms that love, compassion, respect, kindness, known as aloha in Hawaii, are the most important ingredients in education. So we're so grateful for these panelists here tonight. And we're going to move to getting to hear the panelists speak at this time. So we're going to start out by asking you each to respond in about 2 or 3 minutes to our first question, which is, what are you working on right now as an Indigenous activist? What is the focus of Indigenous advocacy in your part of the world, and what really matters to you right now? Stephanie, do you mind starting?
You. Oh, ni gana dev ashidana dishes na gana mission mishkotlikwa. So, answer to that question. I've actually more recently been organizing community education sessions, empowerment sessions in anticipation of election time and then now post. And so really trying hard to educate my community on issues that do, how would I say this, do connect to what is going on. And obviously there have been, right in the very first week, we had threat to our citizenship, questions about our citizenship. And so I took that and decided to connect with our tribal court system, our AG's office, and we've come up with some sort of, we've come up with some curriculum to teach our community members kind of how to better protect themselves when they're questioned, or just really, honestly, really just trying to strengthen their own identity and build their knowledge. I would say currently we've maybe for the last 2 years, we've been receiving a local food assistance. And so we were able to connect with our local food hubs and farmers and ranchers, and also with other Native communities, and be able to give our community members foods from those distributions. So I would say food security is a very big issue, despite the fact that we're considered a per cap community, a per cap tribe. Honestly, that doesn't really create enough revenue for us. And so we've got a lot of families who need the food. Sovereignty in general, just trying to help people to understand what that means, and that it doesn't mean, oh, I can do whatever I want, whenever I want to. Doesn't mean that. It means there's a self-determination. Kind of getting into the sort of convoluted nature of our relationship with the federal government. So helping them to understand that as well. I would say, along with Food, another big thing is the integrity of our ancient corn strain that we have. It We are surrounded by farms. We're here in Iowa, and Iowa is known to be, oh gosh, like 97% modified landscape. And so we may very well be that little 3% that has not been altered very much. And so we are working hard to make sure that our corn is not infiltrated by corporate corn. And of course, there are other things, but I'll allow others to speak. I think I've gone a little past that time.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Such rich topics already coming up. Marina, would you be willing to go next?
Yeah, how odd. So when I think about activism, and people ask me often about activism, in my mind, I don't frame it as activism. I really think that I am just stepping into the role and owning the role that my community has bestowed upon me. And that role looks like bringing people together and supporting, empowering our communities and supporting community and tribal self-determination. I direct a collective impact network in Southeast Alaska. Prior to coming into this role, I was a tribal administrator for many years on my island, and I found that the best form of resistance for us is to stabilize ourselves from the inside out. And so that looks like working at many different intersections. It's this convergence of sorts when we're working in areas of workforce development, cultural vitality, energy independence, fisheries and mariculture, habitat restoration, many different things that are happening in our region. Historically, in recent history, big timber has been kind of the heart of the economy in Southeast Alaska, with fishing and our fisheries trailing just right behind that. And we've unfortunately extracted a fair amount of old growth forest, and we've seen the devastating effects of that in Southeast Alaska. Our salmon habitats are being harmed, and our salmon aren't returning at the same rate. Our deer and all of the animals that live inside of the forest are struggling and are being diverted to different areas because of the patchwork logging efforts that have taken place. And so we do some work with the federal government to showcase that we can take control of our economy and still have a forest that is contributing to the economy, but without extracting large swaths of big timber. And so some of that work looks like working with our communities to empower them to create forest partnerships and workforce development programs that transition our people from logging into this new way of working with the land, where we're doing habitat restoration projects and educating our people about these lands and the resources that come from them. And so for us, I think it's just really empowering the communities and supporting their self-determination.
Thank you so much, Marina. Ku, are you here? I don't know if we had a technical difficulty, or maybe she's one of the Alinas on the screen. Oh, great. Okay, it looks like she might be coming back right now. Welcome back, Ku. Did you catch the question we're starting with?
Yes, and I'm so
Okay,
sorry. I have
wonderful.
no idea what happened. It's one of those, yeah.
Yes.
So for me, one of the important parts that I've been working on, among other things, is really in the area of education, and specifically creating a parallel system of education for our Hawaiian students. Prior to the loss of our sovereignty in 1893, we, the Hawaiian people, were among the top 3 educated nations in the entire world. And then, right, as soon as we were not allowed to speak our language in school anymore, we ended up being on the bottom of every positive educational indicator and on the top of every negative educational indicator from the time on that we have data. It probably happened much earlier, but we don't have any data until the 1980 Native Hawaiian Education Assessment. And from then, since then, it hasn't changed. You know, we've got millions, billions of dollars in federal funds and whatever else, but because the system is just not working for us, that this American system is not working for us, we continue to have these horrible, really statistics that indicate institutionalized racism. And I've tried to make changes within the system, but found sooner or later that it's impossible, that the system is resistant to change and wants to stay in power. Those who are in power want to stay in power. And so our efforts over the last 40 years really have been to create a parallel system of not a brown system of Western education, but truly a native system. And the parallel just being that we get the same amount of funding. That's the hope down the road, kind of, than they get for not educating our children. And so we started out with creating a PK-12 system through using the charter school movement as a vehicle. And we have, over a dozen Hawaiian-focused charter schools on multiple islands that are all proving that this traditional way of education really works for not just our children, but really for all ages. But we do have definitely that data. And so now we're working on the post-secondary and the adult education aspect of the system, now that we know how the other part, how the PK-12 works. And that includes this EA, Ecoversity. So we are in partnership with other Indigenous and minorities across the world who feel that in order for us to save our planet, every single person who wants to engage in post-secondary and higher education needs to learn how to take care of the planet, regardless of if they want to be doctors or if they want to be lawyers or if they want to be pipe fitters or if they want to be storytellers, that everybody needs to learn how to do their part in keeping our planet, healing our planet, really, right? Because it's not about keeping it healthy. It's already been diseased because of so much horrible injustice done to our land and our environment. And so EA, Ecoversity, EA standing, as you mentioned, for education for aloha, with aloha, but it also means sovereignty in Hawaiian. So when I first wrote my PhD, it was a pedagogy of liberation, but we changed it to pedagogy of aloha because ultimately the aloha was the magic, was the change agent, right? That allowed those who felt unable to learn, right? Who felt excluded from the system, when we welcome them into a learning atmosphere that is filled with compassion and kindness and caring, they respond to that. And then when the curriculum is relevant and when they understand that they have a responsibility to their learning, then rigor will automatically happen. And if we do it correctly, it should also be fun, because that's one of the things that we all share as Indigenous people is our propensity and our very interest in having fun. And so I think that's been really right now my main focus, even though I am involved in lots and lots of other things, but it's really clearly stating that these current systems are never going to serve our people and that we need to create our own systems that aren't necessarily systems from the Western perspective, but more inclusive, family-oriented, kind of community-based opportunities for people of all ages to learn in and out of the classroom, with the emphasis on the out of the classroom.
Thank you all. As I was listening, I was thinking about the threads between each of your answers. I'd love to hear what you heard echoed in each other's, but I feel like one thing that really stood out to me was the deep relational orientation that you all spoke about, whether it was through local food assistance and thinking about how to mobilize people, as Stephanie spoke about, in regards to post-election, this like kind of moment post-election threats to citizenship. And then also, Marina, I really love the way you spoke about the role the community bestowed upon you, and that's obviously a relational thing. And that this idea of self-determination and stabilizing from the inside out, I think is a little bit maybe connected to Ku's comments on creating a parallel education rather than trying to change the system from within a Western system, because it wasn't going to be changed, very resistant to change. So I'm curious, like, if you wanted to speak to each other about anything you heard each other speak about in this moment.
Well, I want to apologize. I lost connection there, so
That's
I
true,
didn't
Ku.
hear what the other two said. So, yeah.
Yes, that's
But
true,
I
Ku.
do want to say that for us, as far as our pedagogy is concerned, when Westerners look at education, they want to start with rigor, right? That's their first thing, and we start with relation building, right? And however long that relation building takes is an important investment, because without these relations, and these relations don't only include students to students, students to teachers, teachers to students, teacher to families, but also relation to the land and relation to the spiritual world. That's all part of our relation building, is that it includes the relation building to the environment, which is our family, and the relation to the spiritual world, which is also our family, in that we are the descendants in our culture of the gods.
I love that thinking beyond just people, of course, but to the environment and the land that we are part of.
Yeah, I think that's very beautiful, and that's the way that we see ourselves as well. We're not separate from the land. We're not separate from any of the other animals that are out there. The only thing that really separates us is that we use an iPhone, and the bears and the deer and the fish don't necessarily use an iPhone. So I think they're slightly more sophisticated than we are, perhaps. But when listening to Ku and Stephanie, what I was thinking about is, the power of knowledge and the knowledge that we have. And for all Indigenous peoples, we were able to advance so quickly because we were constantly gathering knowledge. We were constantly observing our surroundings and taking that knowledge into consideration when we were making decisions, thinking about the entirety and not just about ourselves or our small families, but thinking about community and beyond community as well. And so I was thinking about with Ku's work, of course, that's empowering our knowledge systems. And then Stephanie as well, with how much access we have to knowledge all around all around us today. There's not enough time in the day for us to focus on what might be the most important. And so, like Stephanie, bringing some of that knowledge into spaces so that her community and the people there can take that knowledge and make good decisions based upon what they collectively know together. And then I also noticed that it is apparent that none of this work happens in a vacuum and is done by one person, but it's definitely done by a supportive collective.
Well, I find some similarities. Obviously, one of the things that comes to my mind immediately is our word for ourselves is meshkoki huk. Meshkwag is the word for red, and ak is the word for earth. And so our origin story tells us that we are literally created from the earth. And so that's something I can hear in both of you. Just that it's more than just a connection. We are literally of the earth. And so that's, I think I'm kind of going to get into a little bit of the next question about challenges, but that's one of the things that we're working to sort of revive or to help people to remember. And the spiritual aspect, we have a lot of rituals. We have springtime ceremonies, we have fall time ceremonies, we have things that we do during the winter, we have stories that we tell during the winter, we have, there's a cyclical life that we have, and yet our people, especially talking about the iPhone, right? Especially with our younger people, it's harder for them to understand what that connection is. And I happened to work in the school at one point. I was with historical preservation also. And now that you've mentioned workforce, and actually my job falls within our tribe. It's just under the umbrella of workforce development. And so all of that ties together. And my mind is constantly thinking about all the ways that everything is, and even out into these issues are we say they're indigenous issues. These are indigenous problems, or maybe they're political, but it really comes down to the fact that people have forgotten their connection to the earth. We all came from cultures that once believed that. So.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephanie. I think before we go to well, let's just go there because Stephanie, you've already started us so richly thinking about what are the challenges that you face in the work that you're, in the different areas that you spoke about with this core theme that I hear across. What challenges do you see? What's hard about some of the issues you're advocating for, working with in your community?
I can go first if I
Yeah.
So right, I'm sorry. I don't know if you can hear my dog. Can you hear my dog? Okay. she's distracting me a little bit, but if you can't hear her, that's well, I think what we're talking about is, and again, this is a little, sometimes we get into this kind of area where it becomes a little touchy, but I think we're among good company where we can probably speak a little more freely than in other places. But obviously we're facing a white capitalist patriarchy / oligarchy, right? And so that's a huge challenge, and obviously that's it's kind of been building that way, and we've already seen that in our past. You've mentioned AIM and Black Panthers. I was actually somewhat raised by a Black Panther myself, so and AIM as well. So huge challenge there, and that seems to be a global issue because it's the capitalism doesn't work, right? Let's just say that. Because there's a limited view of the earth in that way, right? They think on so-called global terms, but then forget, again, I'm just going to repeat that they forget that connection to the earth, ignoring our ancient knowledge, right? Just ignoring that. And you have factions here and there, and we all have probably run into them who say, oh, I want to live off grid and I believe in this and I'm going to do this. And, there's a good number of those people, but, and I would like to be hopeful to say that maybe at least half of us probably want to be living in a way that's a little more connected to the earth, and but we are facing this another population, another faction of those who simply ignore those things, and there is not that harmony, and there is just brings chaos. We're seeing the effects of that, and assimilation has done its work, right? In my community, I almost spoke to you, Ms. Kwaki. In my community, I I'm one of the few younger people who still speak the language. And my children speak some, but their peers, my daughter just graduated a couple of years ago. My son is set to graduate this year. He, they understand me when I speak. They speak less than I do, but their peers don't speak at all. And so that's another huge factor that we have to face. And even though we have a tribal school and we have a culture and language program, they don't seem to be learning that. And there are issues with that because it then goes into not understanding your kinship system. And really understanding what the word mishkaki means, right? Like, so language is a huge issue, and that's a challenge because of the disconnect.
Yeah, I could definitely talk about challenges all day. I do love to talk about solutions because I think a lot of the challenges are right in front of us and easy to see. For us in Southeast Alaska, we don't have reservations in Southeast Alaska, with the exception of one reservation. It's more similar to Hawaii, where everybody kind of lives amongst each other. And so there's some upsides to that, and there are some downsides to that as well. And so we have to work with each other and with people from outside groups in Alaska. And when I say outside groups, I'm talking more about the federal government, more white-centric conservation organizations, other people that have interests in our area and in our place. And we could, we used to just kind of work in our own bubble and try to push things forward ahead. But I joke with people, and I don't think it's much of a joke, that I'm in the game of assimilation. Assimilation worked very well, and my goal now is to assimilate the people who are not Indigenous to Southeast Alaska to be working and thinking from our values, to be operating in the same ways that our ancestors have tasked us with operating in. And so being able to bring many people from different backgrounds and ideals together to be able to operate in the best way is one of those challenges. And I find that though some people will have, or organizations may have, a great deal of respect for our local Indigenous people, there's still that desire for our people to prove our knowledge systems and prove that we, how we know our sciences, how we know our ways of life. And so by reaching into kind of our Bentwood boxes and pulling that knowledge forward, we're also tasked with trying to bring proof forward. And bringing proof forward when we're talking about knowledge systems that are over 20,000 years old is very complicated, because things have shifted and adjusted with time. And we're people who, we're an oral people. We've never really written things down. We've made sure that there's an audience that will listen and carry that message forward for us. And so the proof for us has always been within the words that we speak. And now we're having to create a new way to capture our knowledge so that it's more palatable for people from the outside. And that slows down our process a lot. Instead of just taking the knowledge for knowledge and for fact, we're having to create different avenues to prove that, this knowledge is something that is of value. And then money, I'll say it, money's a challenge. There's never enough money that will let you just do what you need to do for your communities. They always have an idea of how you might be able to spend that better.
I think for us that we're disconnected, was mentioned earlier, is really a huge challenge after almost 150 years of, foreign occupation by the United States, and a American school system particularly, but also the health system, the criminal justice systems, you name the systems. They did a really, really good job with alienating our people from anything Hawaiian, to the point where it was demonized, and it was just belittled at every step of the way. And so our efforts for the last 30, 40 years, influenced by the civil rights movement, influenced by the Native American movements, has been to revitalize, our language, our ceremonies, our cultural practices, which were pretty much gone, by the 60s, and people who were Hawaiian were ashamed to be Hawaiian because you were stupid and lazy, if you were Hawaiian. And so while we have made strides, definitely, we're still so far away from where we need to be. So, we've had a Hawaiian language revitalization movement, and I've been very much a part of that. And I am very grateful that when my daughters were born, I was the only one speaking to them in Hawaiian, in addition to maybe one or two 90-plus-year-old elders. That was the last of that generation that was raised as native speakers, like my grandfather folks. That now my grandchildren, their mother and their father and their uncle and their auntie and their grandma and their grandpa all can communicate in Hawaiian again. But we are less than 5% of the total population and probably 3% of native Hawaiians, something like that, that can hold simple conversations in Hawaiian, and so we have so far to go, because if you don't understand your language, as was pointed out also, you really will never be able to fully understand your cultural values and your relationship, this kinship relationship to the spiritual world, is what I'm calling it, the environment, all of that as well. And so definitely in those areas, we have huge challenges, and just this overcoming this cultural and historic trauma that has put us, as I said, on the bottom of not just all positive educational indicators, but every other positive social economic indicator as well, with having the highest percentage of people in prison, the highest percentage of people on drugs, the Hawaiians dying 10 years earlier than any other major ethnic group in Hawaii. These are just huge challenges that we face every single day. And the biggest one now being massive outmigration. So as of the last census, more Hawaiians lived on the continental US than in our homeland. And if this continues just the way it has been, and it's actually speeding up, so but even if it would just slow down to the current way of outmigration, within 20 years, less than 1/4 of Hawaiians will live in Hawaii. And then we won't have Hawaii. It's not going to be Hawaii without Hawaiians, because what defines Hawaii are the Hawaiian people and our culture and our way of life. So just keeping our young people home, keeping our retirees home, keeping all of our people home that right now, for economic reasons, have no other choice. That the choices are houseless, and we don't call it homeless, because Hawaii will always be our home. So it's either houseless or move to the continental US, and so our AI Ecoversity, one of the things about that is a career training program that will allow our young people, to have jobs that allow them to be in Hawaii, but also then, so we have a Kanaka Culinary Arts program that then also teach how to eat native foods again, so, but those are just a few of our major challenges, yeah.
Yeah, I echo what Ku is saying with outmigration. I think that's something that a lot of our communities definitely have faced. And some of that is because of policy, right? Historical policy that has physically removed our people from place. And then today it looks different. It can look like a changing economy. It can look like people purchasing seasonal homes within our communities or around our communities that make it hard for our own people to be able to start. And then for us in Southeast Alaska, our we're very keyed into our traditional harvesting and our food preservation. And the harder that it gets for us to harvest within our communities, the harder it is for us to stay there. On paper, it might not look like it's a big economic value because a lot of our trade is done in our way where it's not seen. It's not counted in the numbers, but that trade is what keeps our communities going, trading deer for salmon or woven items. And then when Ku was talking, I thought about this. I just putting in the chat now this phrase that I saw that I really resonated with, where it said, "No Hawaiians, no Hawaii, no Hawaiians, no Hawaii." And I think that's true for all of our communities.
I love that's such a powerful visual you just did, Marina, with the no KNOW, no Hawaii, no Hawaii, no Hawaiians, no Hawaii, and then NO, no Hawaiians, no Hawaii. I'm not sure if folks can see that chat, so I just wanted to articulate it, and I think it also really addresses some of the themes of that Stephanie brought up of remembering and the pain of forgetting and how that's a real challenge. And I also hear just like the power of language, and I have to speak to that almost physically, Stephanie, when you described that, red earth, it was like I had a better sense of what that means and who you are from that language alone, that translation you offered. So I think Ku is starting to speak to this a bit as you finished, but I would love to hear more about, what strategies have been effective. And I think behind that question for me is how and where do you find hope as you face some of these challenges that, as you've all pointed out, are, really significant and deep historical challenges that have been around for many years.
Well, since I started it, I might as well continue. So let me start with the first one, with the hope part, because I really think that we need to have hope. We can't give up hope, because then there's really no point, right, in continuing on with anything. And so for me personally, um, it's celebrating the little things. And in our case, certainly my family, looking at if my family can do what we are doing, um, which is, perpetuating the language, working towards our own family, food sovereignty, um, teaching, throughout Hawaii, in different formats that work for our people, and experimenting how we can get the most effect, with the least effort. And effort just meaning we have only so much to spread around, so we want to do the most we can with the resources that we have, and seeing little kind of successes here and there, kind of thing. I think for me, that's the most important part. And so, for example, we did a 2-day workshop, Thursday, Friday, for a group of 60 early childhood educators, and we took them to the crater and we introduced them to our goddess, to Pele, Grandma Pele. We call her Grandma because she's, again, family to us. And somebody, just posted on Instagram, saying, "I've never considered myself a true Hawaiian, and at times I felt small among so many knowledgeable and strong Hawaiians. But over the past 2 days, I've been inspired to learn more about our history and our language, etc., etc." So even that one person at a time, and we had actually very, very good reflections from everybody. But this was a totally independent Instagram post, kind of thing. And when we can make that kind of one person at a time, really, that's the only way it can happen. If we can affect a group of 60 at one time, wonderful, but it's really, I think, that part about just keep on going. And so for us, we have tried to use technology as a main tool, to reach out to more people and reach out to people that we wouldn't be able to reach out in person. We live in a very rural community in Hawaii Island, and to get to the next big store, and big is not even huge, it's an hour drive kind of thing, right? So we've been using creating asynchronous courses, doing things over Zoom, etc., as a way to reach a broader audience of people. And then my daughter is an Instagram, whatever they call that, influencer, right? So that's also another way, that we're reaching out to just politicize on one level, and acculturate, I guess, would be the other one. I love Marina's idea, of assimilating the other guys. For right now, my main focus is on reconnecting our own people with our knowledge, our ancestral knowledge. And our company, Ku a Kanaka, which means to stand as a Hawaiian, to live like a Hawaiian, and be Hawaiian, is really all about that. It's just to reconnect Hawaiians throughout the world with our language, with our culture, with our ceremonies, with our traditions. And I think and using technology as a tool. But, yeah.
I was just giving Stephanie a moment because sometimes I feel like I've heard my voice the most, and I want to make sure that that's not the case for everybody else. But I get really excited about the work that I have the opportunity to do in Southeast Alaska, because I work across the entire region, and our communities in Southeast Alaska are connected by water, not divided, but connected. And Ku and I were talking about that just before this panel started, how my people used to travel down to Hawaii, and her people also used to travel up to our territory. And we went far beyond that as well. But we're connected within the region, and because we have these layers of different types of people and organizations in our region, what we had done was, over a dispute over land management decisions, we had some tribal governments come together with Native corporation leaders, some people from the federal government, and some people from some white conservation organizations, and together they decided that we might have a lot that we don't agree on, but we do have at least a few things that we do agree on. And so we wanted to work forward with each other and work on those priorities together. And I'm putting in the chat, hopefully Tom can share this, the values that we collectively created that we operate from. And these are the values that we use for the Sustainable Southeast Partnership. And you'll see that the first value there is relationships first. And that means creating very real relationships and lasting relationships. But to be able to get to the point where we could be creating relationships that were healthy relationships with each other, we had to have a lot of harder conversations in the beginning and talk about the history of the place, talk about the history of some of these conservation groups and what it has done to our people, locking our people out of our land, talking about what it's like to be a tribal government without any land that you really have stewardship over. And so it took us quite a while to get moving, actually. We've been around for over a decade, but I'd say those first 5 or 6 years, they were really slow. We say that we operate at the speed of trust, and it took a while for us to develop that trust with each other. About a little over a decade later, now we work really well with each other. We understand that we have these similar priorities, but everybody collectively understands that it comes down to supporting our communities, supporting our Indigenous people, the workforce development that is needed, and that, our people should never be separated from the land, that's not going to do any good to the land when we've been here longer than the current old growth forest. The current old growth forest is maybe 2,000 years old. We have a fish trap that's over 15,000 years old, which tells you that we've been here for at a minimum of a few thousand years prior to that to be able to learn the life ways and how to interact with them. And so, what we do is, bring people together to have these conversations and dialogues, but then also to share our resources with each other, whether that's money or that's just different knowledge systems or a project that's working in one village that another village could alter and replicate. And then another thing that we've spent a lot of time doing is storytelling in our region to attract funders, for one, to share our message with Washington, D.C., so that they understand that we do have control over what happens within our community of Southeast Alaska, but then also to showcase this with our current generations and the younger people. And so when I was younger, in say middle school or high school, there was a strong message that was pushed forward that we needed to finish high school and then go and get an education so that we can go and be somebody somewhere else. For somebody like me who was raised by the land and by the water and has an obligation to my people, that was never an option for me to go somewhere else and to set up a home in a place that wasn't from my people. And so when you thought about, moving forward with education and how we're going to contribute to our place, it was really hard to conceptualize what I would be able to do that could contribute to my community positively. And so we're pushing our stories out there so that the younger people know that our region can look like whatever they want it to look like. We've developed a funding mechanism that's similar to an endowment, but not quite like an endowment, where none of those who are funding us will ever get their money back. They don't get to ask us what we're going to do with it, and we will never report on what we're doing with it. And we have it locked away for the next 50 years for the next generation. And we're only taking the interest off the top for our operating costs within the region so that we can distribute this money amongst these communities and ensure that these projects that many other funders, like the federal government, will not fund. And then I just wanted to show, and this is online as well, we have Indigenous storytellers that are working on doing the storytelling in our region as well. And we're making sure that we highlight these different people in the communities that are doing this work so that people are aware and feel proud and feel a sense of pride. And so that the younger people can look at this anthology that we've created and take it as a source of inspiration so that they can see where they can fit into the world when it comes to time for them for choosing a career path.
Stephanie, any thoughts about successes or effective strategies or where you find hope?
Yeah, so I hear both saying youth, and I help to manage one of our programs, which is our youth internships. And right there, and along with the sessions that I hold, community empowerment, I'm seeing that our community building, right, our relationship building is really being effective. And I often will get the question, what are you doing? Or, well, what difference does it make? Why have these, right? And so, and when we work with our youth, we also provide the similar trainings for them as well. And we talk about lateral oppression and lateral kindness and belonging, communication, things like that. But and so these are really important sort of overarching life lessons that just about anyone could benefit from. But in terms of our Meskwaki community, once they've discovered, hey, I'm related to this person in this way, then that kind of fuels some of the action. And it's really a beautiful thing to see when two young men at 14 years old, and originally considered in our culture, a young man would be considered a man once he's gone through a ceremony, and he's maybe around 10 years old. So these young men are becoming men at a little bit later age in life. But to watch them learn directly from older men that are 70, 80 years old, that's where I see the hope. And I also, I mean, I have to give my kids a little bit of a shout out too, because my daughter, she just turned 20, and she is now living with my aunt so that she can learn to different things, right? Taking care of animals, having a garden, and she just finished maple syrup, so tapping trees and building fences and doing all of that work, but also I'm getting my aunt's grandfather is there. So my daughter is essentially learning more from being with a great grandfather right now. And so to see those kind of relationships happen as well. And it's I'm not going to take all of the credit for that, but that's one of the ways that we introduce those things to them is through our internship program. And I would say that there are times when our community empowerment sessions are sort of small. And sometimes even the group members will ask, well, what are we doing? And I'm like, you know what? It doesn't matter how many people are here. We have a room full of people or we have 5 people. It doesn't matter. Because when someone hears another person relate to them or to, oh, I just learned that. Right? And to have that light bulb, and then they're sharing information and they're talking, that's where it is, right? I mean, you hear it, it almost gets to be a little bit cliche to hear grassroots or just build community, then, you know, but when you see those relationships happen and you start to notice that these younger people are saying, oh, we need to go put tobacco down for this. We need to go and pray for this. And you don't just take and you put something back, right? You're seeing those things happen. That's where the hope is. And I mean, also another sort of semi cliche, or at least a little bit of a co-opted belief is the 7 generations, right? We do have that in our culture, but we are the 7th generation, but our children are our 7th generation and on down. And we are constantly thinking ahead. And I honestly take that to heart, and I do my best to live in a way that would be honoring ancestors and anybody to come later. So again, I to give credit to Dr. Koo, because she's mentioned the spiritual aspect as well, and that's really super important. It's removed from everything else, and so to be able to see those things happen with our young people, that's really it's just amazing. So that's where my hope is, and also this sort of an event, right? So thank you all for organizing it and honoring us with to be able to be present for this. But that in and of itself also, because it allows us to speak for ourselves and to counter the majority, you know, the marginalized voices or the underrepresented. It's really important to hear from people who think a little differently than you do. And so, and my great grandmother used to always say, you can learn something from anyone's belief, and you can incorporate that into your own way of life and how you choose to live life. And so, this allows that kind of an opportunity to happen.
Thank you. That was so beautiful. I feel like Zoom's a little bit awkward sometimes, because I'm sure if we were all in person that Koo and Marina and Stephanie could be speaking and connecting across each other, but Zoom makes it a little more clunky. But I just wanted to hold up some really I felt like I listening to and thinking, all of you, and thinking about how you're offering us this frame of the world that does ask us to think about water as connection and not as a divider, or the land as this layered, deep thing we could have a relationship with no matter who we are or who our people were. And also the way we can think about time differently. It doesn't just have to be linear. We can be thinking about the future, the present, and our ancestors and the past all at once, and thinking about our relationships with the future and the past as as we encounter one another and our world. So thank you. So many beautiful offerings. And I love that phrase, we operate at the speed of trust, Marina. That's so great. Because it allows for all different kinds of speeds at one phrase. Um, we have just a few minutes before we open it up for Q&A, and I just want to remind every panelist attendee who's out there that if you look, there's a Q&A box there, and you can type in a question that you have, or if you want to hear more about anything that any of our panelists have mentioned or are working on that you heard in their bio, please feel free to ask questions. We're just so lucky to have them here, and it's a wonderful opportunity. But before we move to that, in the last just few minutes, I think it would be really lovely to hear your thoughts about, how can we center Indigenous knowledge systems or frameworks or spiritual ways of being in the world, especially, Stephanie, as I'm guessing most of us who are listening or are on the attendees, given that we're a predominantly white institution, are not necessarily Indigenous. Anybody have thoughts about how can we center Indigenous knowledge systems, no matter who we are?
Well, I think it was already alluded to that at one point everybody was indigenous, right? And everybody had a relationship to the land, and everybody had a relationship to the spiritual world, however you want to define that kind of a thing. So it's not like those are foreign concepts, they're dormant concepts, right? And some cultures have moved away from, this innate familiar relationship with the environment that we as indigenous people still practice as a way of life, kind of thing, and have moved away from familiar relations with other people, right? And looked at others versus, that kind of thing. And I think as far as the spiritual world is concerned as well, many have lost a connection with that. I'm not talking about religion now, right? I'm talking about a connection between those entities and the balance that is necessary for a healthy, happy life, which is that balance between people, the environment, and the spiritual world from our worldview. And so I think that's something that everybody can embrace. And Marina started out with talking about a concept that we call kilo in Hawaiian, which is observation, and she mentioned how her people, and the same goes for us, have really gained the knowledge, and we look at our knowledge as being infinite, really. We have a proverb that says, infinite is the knowledge of the Hawaiians. Lehu lehu a mano mano ka ikena akaoi. And tapping into that infinite knowledge by engaging in that kind of observation, right? Spending some time outside in a spirit of reverence and respect, and observing nature and observing cycles and observing how things are supposed to work, kind of. And then also you will see where that cycle has been disrupted, right, from outside forces. What happens when this balance does not exist anymore? I think that's a really good start, so you don't have to appropriate somebody else's culture, kind of thing. But where you can make your own connections and awaken that dormant knowledge of your ancestors, and it might, be a couple thousand years. When we look at cultures like Marinas, that's really nothing for some cultures, to revive and to reawaken that which is already within us.
Thank you, Koo. Marina, Stephanie, do you want to add anything before I go to the question and answers the audience is giving us?
I think that was a really great answer. I think I would just maybe add to just remember to go back in your own genealogy, right? And to remember where your people came from and find out what they believe. Find out. So that's the reawakening or the reconnecting, right? So that's one of the things that I actually will tell my friends to do, well, where did you come from? Right? Because we often will forget, especially in the United States, that that most people are from somewhere else, and we don't honor those things, the languages that have been forgotten there as well, and the belief systems that existed before. So.
Yeah, I agree with both. And another thing is, when I talked about operating at the speed of trust or finding balance at the speed of trust, I think that a lot of that looks like, working, if you're going to be working within the community that you're living in or whichever community you're working within, finding ways to connect with the local Indigenous people and also hear about the values that they are operating from, and not just hearing them so that you can recite them back. Not coming in as if you're going to be the savior and pull the community out of an economic slump, but to truly be a part of the community and to be operating from those values, to understand that all relationships should be reciprocal relationships, and that within most Indigenous knowledge systems, balance and respect are at the core of how we treat each other and how we treat the world around us. We have this saying at home that's Haklusti, and it's very hard to translate those two words. It's paragraphs long when you do attempt to translate it, but essentially it's getting at that it's about how we walk or move through our lifetime and our relationship to all other lifeways around us. And for us, lifeways includes everything down to a rock. When this was translated, this was before we were using cell phones and things like that, but everything carries spirit around us. And so anything that I do is going to have effects on things that are surrounding me. And so you need to make sure that we're operating from a good place of Haklusti, and understanding that if I'm somebody from outside and I'm approaching, say, a tribal government and wanting information and knowledge so that I can operate in a good way, that might look like a long process. That could look like relationships that are years in the making before those people are feeling like they trust you enough to be able to share that knowledge or pull you in on their projects. But I would encourage people to not give up on that process. That's how we become family, right? Is we dedicate our time and our love to each other and what matters to each other as well. And we, uplift that.
Thank you so much to all of you. I just want to call attention to the first comment that came in earlier from Lynn Kavapel. This really isn't a question, but more an expression of appreciation. Thank you all for being a part of this and for sharing your valuable perspective. So a lot of gratitude from the audience. And then our first question is from Hannah, who asked, How do you think that individualism, whether Western or particularly American individuality, has hindered your effort to strengthen your own communities and the awareness of others, whether that's awareness of the environment or Indigenous struggles or sovereignty? So really thinking about um, is individualism or that like kind of Western framework of the individual one of the challenges in strengthening your communities?
Well, given that the Americanization effort, right, was very intentional, was very well funded and supported, um, certainly I would say in our case, our parents' generation was very much infected by that concept of individualism. And sadly, in our case, we don't have any more elders, though they are the elders now, but we can't send our grandchildren to them to get any cultural knowledge, or very little. I mean, there are a few exceptions, but I'm just talking in general. The majority of that are the elders today have very much bought into this individualistic lifestyle, from wanting to have their own home and wanting to just take care of their nuclear families and all that kind of thing. So I definitely think there has been a lot of damage done. But I have a lot of hope in our younger generations. And um when I see little girls, with the "It's All About Me" t-shirt, I just kind of advise them to take that off right away because it's a bunch of BS. But I think our younger generations, having been raised in this um, era of the Hawaiian, what we call the Hawaiian Renaissance, and a new, old, it's both ancient and modern kind of a perspective on who we are and where we come from. Not obviously not all Hawaiian children, but there are more and more families where the young people are getting it, and especially our huge movement in 2019 to protect our sacred mountain of Mauna Kea really brought tens of thousands of young people together. And I really didn't see them acting in an individualistic way. And so I do have a lot of hope that, maybe that generation that's our elders now, maybe there's very little hope for them because they were so indoctrinated, and so they were so brainwashed. But I think the younger generations, we have a lot of hope that they can see that pupu kahi I holomua, united we will progress, is a proverb that was as true, 1,000 and 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago than it is today. And so I feel that we're on the right track there, and more of our young people are understanding the need to collaborate and creating their own networks. And some of it is using social media, but there's also a lot of in-person contact and collaboration among, as I said, my children's generation. Yeah.
Thank you, Ku. Another question is, as a history major, we've talked about, this is from Addie, we've talked about reporting and preserving history with respect and dignity. What to you is the best way to preserve your history? Now, we've talked about a little bit about oral history and sharing the word as proof, that might not be taken as legitimate in some spaces, but has like a deep and ancient history.
I'm happy to hop in on this question here. I have very strong feelings about this, and I believe that, the best way to preserve our different histories is to work with our people and empower our people to preserve those histories in the ways that we see fit. That may look like continuing with oral tradition and only oral tradition, and ensuring that we have the spaces to gather and we have the attention of those that need to be listening to those messages. it comes down to a really good conversation that we have often about data sovereignty as well. Where should this information lie? Should it lay within a museum, within a university, on iCloud, or should it be something that's like in, for example, we have physical clan houses in a clan house. I think that this question is something that is case by case with every different, Indigenous population, because we should always be supporting their sovereignty, whether they're recognized as a tribal government or not. We should be supporting the sovereignty of those people and empowering them to have the resources and the spaces to be able to work on things like this, like history and preservation.
I love that, Marina, because I think it is back to like core ideas about self-determination and sovereignty that are maybe at the heart of some of the discussions we're having. Susan Adams is asking, she says, thank you for so generously sharing your wisdom, experience, and hopes. I would love some reading recommendations from each or any of you. Who should we be reading? If you have folks right off the top of your head, I know Marina, and for those in the audience, is typing answers, so you can see her answers there. But if you have any off the top of your head to share with us, or we can also collect and send out to the participants after as well. But yes, if you have people you love, share.
We had talked a little bit about, this concept of environmentalism and culture versus science. I know Marina mentioned it. I think braiding sweetgrass is a wonderful, merging of those kind of ideas. Just as an example, we have definitely lots of resources in Hawaiian or about Hawaii, and so I will send some of that, and also Aotearoa, our Maori cousins, have written some interesting things. So I will forward that to you folks, Julie.
Thank you so much, Ku. That would be wonderful. Okay, our next question is from Amy. She's asking, do you think that colonization has an influence on why we're losing more Indigenous languages and culture? If so, do you think we're seeing bias in today's world because of the colonization without us realizing? Any thoughts about that? And panelists, you may be able to see the Q&A. Like sometimes it's easier to see and read the text, and you can click on that Q&A button there at the bottom. I love this question because I think language was so central to so many of your answers.
Yeah, part of me is kind of waiting for Stephanie to step in because I would also like to learn from her as well. But it has a direct influence on us losing our languages. I mean, it was quite literally ripped out of our people's mouths, and there are a lot of people today who won't speak because of that trauma, and we're losing our languages at a quick rate, or they're going silent at a quick rate, I would say. And when we lose access to speaking and thinking within our language, or our languages, we also begin to alter the way that we're seeing the world around us. And the way that this actually makes me emotional, the way that we're communicating with our ancestors as well. It's, my ancestors can understand English just as well as they can understand French or Spanish. And so that's very unfortunate that oftentimes I'm trying to put things into words that can be understood by the natural world around me. But I would say that, that's a direct impact that we're seeing and that we're facing, and it completely alters the way that a community functions. And so the more that we're able to pull our language back in, the more that we get people thinking in our languages, and if we're very lucky, dreaming in our languages, then the better off we're going to be, because when you can think in your language and see in your language, then you're able to carve out the pathways that are the best pathways for our peoples to go down together.
I couldn't agree more with Marina on that. For us, our proverbs say in the language is life and in the language is death. And without our language, we can't be Hawaiians, at the level that we need to be in order to survive into the future.
Our belief is that in order to go where you are meant to go after you pass, you must be able to speak your language. So, and you cannot, our gods don't speak English. Our gods don't speak French. Our gods, so they only speak Meskwaki. So to answer the question, it's not a do you think. It's I don't mean to be cynical or mean or anything in this answer, but when you consider my great grandmother was the very first Meskwaki to be formally educated, and she recognized, she came home, that this is where she wanted to be. This is who she wanted to be. And what did she do? But she took off the high neck collar and went inside, changed her clothes into a two-piece dress, camp dress, and stayed that way for the rest of her life. And she just spoke Meskwaki to her children. Now they ended up going to the day school, which was no better than the boarding school. Same situation, same form of education, same form of punishment, right? And so I ended up being raised by that generation of people. My mother was not part of my life. It was my great grandmother and her children who basically raised me. And so they had the experience of being able to go to the day school, which meant that they could go home at the end of the day. But within the school, my aunt was talking about being beaten for speaking Meskwaki. She was beaten, and my grandpa wouldn't talk about it. And their youngest sibling, she ended up learning more English because they started to teach her so that she wouldn't have to go through that. So it's a direct influence. And just today, my husband had a conversation with a coworker of his who happens to be Filipino. And that coworker was complaining about, well, why are there 3 options? Press 1 for English, press 2 for Spanish, press 3 for French. And he was complaining about that there were these options. And one of the reasons why we have not had an official language, or that English has not been our official language, is exactly because of our people. All of our indigenous people here, we each have a relationship, federal relationship, right? The treaties that we have between our people and the federal government. In those treaties, it's part of our agreements that we are allowed to live as we see fit, as we want to be, and speak our languages. And so that's one of the reasons why English is not the official language, or hasn't until now. We're getting to that now. So that imagine the damage that is going to do. And I understand that there's a certain villainization of specific groups of people right now that is meant to attack, but all of us will suffer from it. So and as far as biases, I personally feel like we all kind of walk around with those in some way or another, and we all still have our own judgments, whether or not we're open-hearted or not, right? We still have something, because we can only see from our own personal experience and then from our cultures. So
I think additionally with biases, thinking about, when people, outside people are talking with our people who maybe have our native language as their first language, or at least have that way of thinking, it can be so hard to translate. what we're saying in our language into English, just like Hakusi'i, we could have done a whole webinar on that concept itself. My partner is Hawaiian, and asking about what does aloha mean beyond what you see in a gift shop. And that was the most beautiful couple-hour conversation all around one concept that is such a beautiful core part of this culture. And so when we don't have the time to really translate across, because our languages are so complex and connected to everything around. I mean, talking about those thousands of years of observation, they're so connected. Talk about 20 different words for snow. It's harder to translate, and so it might dumb down what we're actually meaning. It might not come across as something that's of value or of intelligence, when the reality is that the core, the concepts that we're trying to get at, are so complex and so intelligent that within one day we don't have time to explain that, because that's a lifetime of learning.
Thank you so much, with deep gratitude for sharing your perspectives. And we didn't get to all the questions, but we are going to ask the panelists if they'll offer just a few responses to the ones we didn't get to, and we will send those out to all the attendees. I want to just share my screen quickly, because at Butler, we have a Butler community requirement, and some students who may be watching can get their BCR credit from attending. So there's that for folks who are interested in doing that. And to the right, you'll see there is a learn more, some links to learning more. And we will also share out resources as well, books and reading ideas that have been offered. Thank you so, so much. I'm so grateful for this conversation, for the thoughts about language and self-determination and sovereignty, and the deep threads that connect so much of what you all shared. So much gratitude. Thank you very, very much.
Sheesh, how
Mahalo and aloha.
Oh, get that behavior.
Thank you all. That was so beautiful. Wow. Just really powerful.
Yes, and I'm afraid the only way to sort of close the webinar is to close it for all of us. So
Oh, okay. That's too bad.
I know, but I'm going to reach out to Ku and Stephanie and Marina certainly by tomorrow, just to thank you, to follow up with those last couple questions, if you do have a moment to answer for our attendees. This, as Julie said, was really beautiful and powerful, and not always easy. And I just want to say thank you so much.
Yes,
And
thank
it's kind
you.
of fun. Thank you all for letting us try this out, and I hope it wasn't too boring for you.
Oh,
It
I
went-
should have, there's still 12 people around. I meant to remind everyone to come back on Wednesday. Sorry about that, Tom. I saw Mike was here. I don't know if he still is. Mike Ng is a Hawaiian panelist who will be here on Wednesday. So anyway, it was so lovely.
We all have a Hawaiian connection. We all,
Yeah, it seems
I have a Hanai family. So
so funny.
yeah.
amazing.
It was
Yes,
Yeah,
thank
I
you
look forward
so
to
much.
staying connected.